Hello, I'm Bryn Jeffries from Grok Academy. In this series, I interview people in and around the field of computer science education. In this episode, I'm in conversation with Associate Professor Michael Cowling from Central Queensland University. In 2020, he received an award for teaching excellence from Universities Australia, which I'll be asking him about shortly. As a researcher, Mike has been exploring how technology can be used in education. And he founded the Create Collaborative Research Lab at Central Queensland University. He is a well-respected science and technology communicator, appearing on both radio and television. So let's get started. First of all, I'm really interested to hear about what led to the teaching award that you received.
Well, I mean, the question I suppose would be, where do you want me to start? It's I've been an academic for a long time, knock on wood, we would maybe say 20 years perhaps. And I've always been interested in how students learn and the mechanisms that they use to learn. But what's been particularly interesting to me as a technology academic is about how technology integrates into the classroom process. And so I suppose that's really where the teaching award begins, right? Is this idea of how do we effectively integrate technology into the teaching process. And it starts with my own classroom, and it did start with my own classroom. And I can go back and I can read teacher reflections, from many years ago, where I thought about what was happening in my own classroom and how I was teaching effectively with technology. But then for the teaching award, it then extends beyond my own classroom and towards other teachers, either other teachers in higher education, but also teachers in K-12 education, primary and secondary education as well. And ultimately, what I came up with was this mantra, which you may have heard me say before, or people may have heard me say before, which is pedagogy before technology. And often when I say that, people look at me and they go, but you're a technology guy. Shouldn't you be into technology? And the answer is yes. But I think I've realized over those 20 years that sometimes technology is not the best choice in order to teach a particular concept. And if we take a technology first approach to learning, then often we'll end up in a situation where the technology is not effective or not appropriate. And so instead, my argument is this pedagogy first approach. And if that means that you don't use a piece of technology for your learning, well, then that's fine, as long as the students learn effectively. But of course, I am a technology guy, and so I do think there are lots of ways that technology can enhance student learning. And my areas that I've worked in, like in virtual reality and augmented reality, for example, is me saying I think VR or AR does have a place to improve learning, but ultimately it should be pedagogy before technology. So that was, I mean, if you wanted a summary of why did I win this award, I think it's pedagogy before technology and the various facets of that. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those different facets in a minute, if you'd like.
Well, I am interested just in the idea that you have these tools and that you should be using, they should be helping you to teach rather than you being sort of forced to fix your teaching around them. I suppose it's something that I see in a lot of, you see it in a lot of places. We're always using technology so much these days, and to some extent we are changing how we do things because the technology exists. We're using Zoom a lot more now, and that's obviously driven by necessity recently, but I feel like there's some intersection. We are changing as people because the technology allows it, and to some extent you have to adapt to fit to the technology. And it feels like there's a bit of tension, frustration between sort of these things. How much should a person change versus how much should the technology change to help?
A lot of my work started in that space, actually. It's interesting that you should mention that. I got not in trouble, but certainly got in a little bit of hot water earlier on in my career for talking about digital dinosaurs, people that don't adapt to the technology. And there's this very famous definition by a guy called Mark Prensky. It's getting a bit old in the tooth now. He did it at the beginning of the 21st century, 2001, and he defined digital natives and digital immigrants. And the essential sort of idea of that definition is that younger kids are digital natives. They grew up with technology, and older people are digital immigrants. They grew up in a world where technology wasn't a part of what they did. And since Prensky came up with that definition, a lot of people have argued about it, and in particular about the generational aspects of it. And they've said, well, just because you're a young kid doesn't mean you're a digital native necessarily. And of course, the other side is digital immigrants. So, I think I'm really good with technology, and really, I don't think you should be calling me a digital immigrant. That's not fair. And yes, people that you kind of refer to as digital dinosaurs sometimes get a little bit upset as well. But I think you're right. I think there is a tension there in terms of how much do we need to adapt to the technology? And you use Zoom as a good example. And I talked about this in a seminar recently. We were all forced to use Zoom last year because of what happened with the pandemic. And so we had to change our teaching practice. And I think the commentary in the media has been that this has been hard for some teaching staff and for some academics, because there is a tendency to want to continue to just do what you were doing before. And unlike, where you're told, there is technology that can help. In this situation, we were told, well, this technology is now something you have to use. And so I think there is that tension between moving forward and using the technology, but also being pragmatic about what the technology is used for. And that's actually one of the reasons I really enjoy working with K-12 teachers, is that K-12 teachers are really pragmatic. They go, if I'm going to use technology in the classroom, you better give me a really good reason why that technology is going to lead to better learning outcomes for my students. Whereas I think higher education teachers, if you show them a sexy new piece of technology, sometimes they'll get really excited about the tech without really thinking about how they're actually going to teach with it. And so I really enjoy the K-12 teachers' approach. And but I also see that they then need to be given good reasons for using the tech. And so all the workshops and things that I run are about giving them that light bulb moment, giving them an opportunity to go, I can now see why I might use VR or AR or drones or robotics in my classroom.
It seems like there's again, another frustration I see, and this is both at university and I imagine at schools, is that there are a lot of technologies which are acquired by an institution, in principle to help, ostensibly to help the educators, and they might not be the same thing as what an educator might have chosen if they decide to put it themselves, or they might be felt like they're required to teach they've got to use this tool. I'm thinking here, like from schools examples, I remember a lot of teachers grumping about the whiteboards, the e-whiteboards or
smart boards.
Smart boards, yeah. But I can think of also many examples in the university space where you're just like, here is this tool, go use it. And at the same time, as a lecturer, you're always looking around for many tools that will help you, and it's frustrating to not be able to get permission to use a lot of these other exciting tools. And I don't really know how best to navigate that. And it must be even more of a problem in schools.
It's funny that you should say that. I gave a keynote at Future Schools. I want to say 3 years ago now. It's the biggest conference for K-12 teachers in Australia. And if you want to see 300 teachers all roll their eyes synchronously at the same time, mention the idea that the principal bought, as you said, a suite of iPads, right? And then said to the teachers, well, now that we've bought these, now that I've invested all of this money, you have to use them. It's such a common refrain amongst K-12 teachers, and iPads, for whatever reason, were one of the key things. All the schools said, well, we all need iPads, we all need these new devices, and now that we've spent all of this money, you guys are going to have to use these in your teaching. And all of the teachers, as I said, they're very pragmatic. They go, well, wait, what do you want me to do with these iPods? How do you want me to use this device to teach English or math or humanities and social science? And they can't make that connection, not because they're not good teachers. And in fact, I think most of them are good teachers, but more so because they just don't understand. The technology moves so fast that understanding it is a challenge. So yeah, I think that is a frustration. But and then you're right. The flip side is the frustration the other way around, is that you want to use the technology. Sometimes you're ahead of the curve and you want to use a piece of technology and you can't, because that technology hasn't caught up to how education is going to use it. I had an issue just recently with the Oculus headsets, and you might know that Oculus is owned by Facebook. And so with the new Oculus headset, you need to have a Facebook account to use the headset. And of course, if I want to use those in my classroom, then my university had 1,000 questions about, well, whose Facebook account are we going to use to log into these headsets? Is it going to be the students? Because that's a little bit scary. Is it going to be your Facebook account logged into all of the headsets, Michael? Because we don't really want the students logged into Facebook as you. And so we can't work out. We're still trying to work out how best to enable these devices for education use because of that limitation. And of course, Oculus doesn't care. Or if they do care, it's going to take them a couple of years before they kind of catch up and say, well, actually, universities and schools want to use these devices. And by then, there's probably a new version of the device out as well. So you end up chasing your tail a little bit.
Do you think that there are things that, ways to make this whole process easier and more accessible?
Well, I mean, I think this comes back to what I'm, as you said to me right at the very beginning, what am I trying to achieve? What do I want to do? I think if I want to sell pedagogy before technology, that's number one. And number two is I want to convince teachers that technology is not scary. Right. I want to convince them that the technology is going to work for them and is going to be effective for them in the classroom. And I think then we can have a grassroots bottom up style effort where instead of the principal buying 150 iPads and then saying to the teachers, you've got to use them, we've got the teachers advocating and saying, well, actually, I really understand the technology and I really understand how it all works. And I've been to Michael Cowling's Weaving Technology workshop, and he said that drones are really good for doing these particular things and for teaching geography and teaching these concepts. And so I would like a drone. And I would hope that if they go to the principal with those very specific requirements, well, then what we'll end up with is technology that is fit for purpose, right? So, and I've seen that kind of grassroots bottom up mechanism work in the past. It worked for Zoom, I think, really, really well over the last 5 years as an example. Ask yourself why we're not all using Skype or Microsoft Teams. And it's because Zoom had this grassroots effort where every individual preferred Zoom. And I think we could do it with tech as well. But I think we need to convince the teachers that it's not scary. Because I can tell you, I still meet a lot of teachers where they think the tech is scary, or where they think the tech only belongs in the STEM classroom, right? Oh, that's not something I do with tech. I don't use tech in my English or my maths class. Tech is what the students do when they walk halfway across the school and go to the digi design or the STEM classroom. I don't think we should. I personally don't think we should be doing that.
You mentioned it's something, technology being scary, and I suppose another way of phrasing that is, or potentially part of it, is the cognitive load. That's if you speak to someone like Raina Mason, she does a great explanation for the cognitive load, and it feels like there's one here. When you have new technology, part of the resistance is you've got to think about it enough to understand it, enough to then go and make use of it, and that's time that the teacher often doesn't have. And it feels like there's an opportunity to sort of pull down the cognitive load. And obvious examples would be like lesson plans. Lego is a great example of this. They have a nice lesson plan for how to go and use their Mindstorms kit in the classroom for a science class or something.
Yes.
And I think that's something that teachers really benefit from. If you can give something other than just, here's this technology, can you think of a way to use it? Here's technology, here's an example of how to use it. It's one way to sort of make these things more easy to sort of incorporate into the classroom. Do you think there's something like that can be done in the AR, the VR space like that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, give me a bucket of money and tell me that I don't have to do my usual job, and I will sit down and I will develop a set of VR or AR tasks or exercises that relate directly to the ACARA curriculum. Because we all know that ultimately, for a teacher, that's the thing they really want, right? They want you to say in the ACARA curriculum, in this particular box, this is as you said, this is a particular lesson. Here's a plan, and here's how you might use technology effectively in that particular lesson. And I've seen organizations do that really effectively in the past. The IEEE, which represents engineers, they do some stuff that directly relates to the ACARA curriculum for their teacher in service program. The CSIRO, I've seen them do some stuff in relation to science that directly relates to the curriculum. And of course, the organization you work for, Grok Academy, does some of that stuff as well, tries to bring things down to that pragmatic level, that easy level for the teachers. And I really recognize that's really helpful for the teachers. And again, it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're just a little bit overwhelmed by the technology, and they need somebody like me, like an educational technologist, to help them take some of those shortcuts and really understand the technology so that they can connect it to the lesson. So yes, I think that's something we should do with technology. And I think it would be awesome if we could do that and we could sit down and we could work those things out. It's just a matter of somebody having the opportunity and the time to actually make those connections. And of course, one of the challenges with technology is that technology moves so quickly that you probably need to update it fairly frequently. The engineers can get away with building a windmill contraption that still works 10 years from now that teaches about kinetic motion. But I think the technology guys, you use the Oculus Quest, and then in a couple of years, you'd have to update it to some new device. So yeah, so there we go. We just need funding, Bryn, for writing it in the first place and then updating it every couple of years. So.
Yeah. I'd love to keep it.
I'm not asking you, but hopefully.
But maybe can you tell me a bit more about what your where you're going with your work with Oculus or other devices?
So we do a combination, and I suppose it depends whether you're talking about the outreach or whether you're talking about the research, and we do a little bit of both. So in terms of outreach, particularly to K-12 teachers, but also we're starting to do some outreach for vocational education teachers and also higher education academics as well. It really is for me about that light bulb moment. So I've developed a series of workshops, which I mentioned before. It's called Weaving Technology into the Fabric of the Classroom. And the Weaving Tech workshops, they are about having speeches and hands-ons for teachers and using innovative tech. And it's not so much about giving them those lessons. Again, I'd love to write the lessons, but don't have time. So instead, what I want to do is just show you the tech and then very clearly connect it to the kinds of things that you might want to teach. And so I'll show you augmented reality, and then I will say to you, here's some examples of how you might use AR to teach English, to teach maths, to teach history, to teach geography. Here are some mechanisms to use robotics or drones. I mentioned drones before as a technology to teach geography, for example. So why not take the kids out and fly a drone around the neighborhood or around a natural feature and show them the cliffs or show them the geographical features of a particular area. And once you do that, I've seen again and again with literally hundreds of teachers that light bulb moment come on where they go, oh, I thought drones were cool, but now I'm sort of really understanding how drones can actually be used in education. And so then when it comes back to doing research in the area for me, what I then do is I say, well, where are there gaps in that space? Where are there places where maybe we might build something to help with this? And so, for example, one of the projects we're working on, we've just started actually, is a physics VR project where we're working with a physics teacher who teaches year 11 and 12 students, and another physics teacher that teaches students that are about to study engineering at university through our enabling program. And we've spoken to both those teachers and said, well, what physics concepts would be more effective in virtual reality? What kinds of things might be useful for you to show them as an interactive sort of mechanism, as opposed to just teaching them with videos or textbooks? And so we did some stuff on planetary motion, and now we're looking at doing some stuff on electromagnetism. So you can hold, positive and negative particles in your hands and see how they attract and repel each other, and throw them through electromagnetic fields and see how they react in the field, all in virtual reality. And so we build those kinds of tools, and then we test those tools and see how they work, and we hope that we can roll them out for those classrooms. So that's the research that we do, and that's the outreach, and hopefully it all sort of pushes towards that overall narrative that we were talking about before.
That's really fascinating. I wish I had VR in my own classrooms. I can see that there'll be, as you said, those light bulb moments, those moments when you suddenly unlock all the opportunities. You go from what is this strange new thing to suddenly, I can do all these new lessons, I guess. And I suppose it's a bit like apps, or smartphones. And for a long time, there was like, why would you want a computer in your phone? What's the extra value in it beyond just playing a few games, to suddenly it becoming, there are so many things now that's sort of an indispensable thing. So maybe VR and drones will be feel like a prerequisite for teaching a lot of these subjects.
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought, isn't it? The to use a British term, the watershed moment. I know you say in Britain it's a bit different, but that watershed moment where you all of a sudden realize that no, VR could be used for these particular jobs and these particular tasks. In IT, we sometimes call it the killer app, right? The app that actually makes people realize this works. I don't necessarily think there's one killer app for VR or AR or robotics. I think you're probably more correct. I think there's a sequence of different things that are very specific to a particular domain, where you say, well, in this context, this app can be used in this way, or this technology can be used in this way to help. And I think that maybe is the challenge with technology, because let's be honest, like I sometimes see, and I won't name any names, but I sometimes see situations where the technology doesn't make a lot of sense, where they have taken that technology first approach and they've kind of gone, okay, well, we're going to do augmented reality, and we're going to do augmented reality in this way. And I look at it and I go, it's not very good AR though, is it? It doesn't really make a lot of sense for that to be augmented reality. And you sort of go, well, can't we kind of understand the context of it a little bit better so we can use it more effectively? But I guess that's just about trying a whole bunch of different things, isn't it? And seeing what works.
So I suppose the natural counter to that is then also, what are the risks, do you think, to these new technologies in teaching? Do you think there are risks or dangers that we have to be aware of?
I'm a technologist first and foremost, right? So I call myself an educational technologist, but I went through a journey over the last 10 or 15 years where I tried to decide whether I was more of an education person or more of a technology person. And I kind of landed on the fact that I'm more of a technology person than educational technology, but I'm certainly on the technology side. Yeah. So if I were to get one of my colleagues along here who was more of an education person, then he might say, well, there's a whole bunch of learning theory and there's a whole bunch of stuff that kind of underlies some of the choices that we make that you may not be considering in this. And that's I think that where the risk comes in. Now, it's up to you to decide, and up to the people that are listening to this to decide how important the educational theory is. Theory X and theory Y classrooms and Piagetian versus Vygotskian styles of learning, or even just the modes of learning, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, all of these different ideas. How important are they in terms of contributing to effective education? But I think the reality is that because technology moves really quickly, often we'll have situations where you go, let's try this in VR, And even if it's pedagogy driven, pedagogy first about what is going to be effective in your classroom, I think often it may not be backed by a lot of educational theory, because that takes longer. Right. And again, I'm not blaming anybody. Technology just moves so quickly that you just need to try something. Right. And at least, the very least, you can try it with some pedagogical backing. That's what I kind of advocate for. But I think idealistically, you'd want to try it with some pedagogical backing and also some educational theory backing what you're doing. So I think that's what we're working on as an ed tech person, and in the ed tech research space, scholarship space, we're still working through that, I think. And that's me being quite honest about where we are in this space.
I suppose the one other aspect that comes to mind then is, being in Australia, that one of the things that's quite clear is that there are inequities in education. Obviously, rural communities have issues getting decent broadband, and as we introduce other technologies, that there'll be the risk that some people will not have access to these excellent new educational resources, which I can't really see a way around other than hoping that there will be good investment from government, I guess, to make those kinds of things available.
Yeah, we call it the digital divide, right? The haves and the have-nots, and it is a major problem across the world. But as you say, particularly in Australia, because of those large geographical distances that we have, and some of those regional and rural communities. And I get asked this question by radio journalists quite often, like, what do we do in this situation? And I agree with you. I'm not sure that I have a magic bullet answer, really. The best I can come up with at this stage is that if we push the technology barrow long enough, I guess eventually everybody will have access to some form of technology. And so I think we kind of have to balance it along both ends. On one side, if we keep on pushing this barrow and we keep on saying technology is important for learning, well, then we encourage people to have access to this technology. And then on the other side, I think we need to say, as technologists, well, how can we make sure that this is available to the widest amount of people possible? And so that's simple stuff like making sure that your stuff runs on older versions of devices and previous versions of VR hardware, takes advantage of the lower bandwidth or recognizes the lower bandwidth that happens sometimes when somebody's dialing in from a rural or remote area. But I think that's the best we can do. It's called the stratification model in technology, and technology recognizes that if you have long enough, eventually these things do get down to all socioeconomic levels. But I think you raise a very valid point, which is that there is always this spread. I think the trick is just to make sure that it doesn't turn into that divide. But I don't have the magic bullet. I wish I had the magic bullet, but it's it's still an open question.
Yeah, and I think that it's still imperative that we teach with all these resources that we have available, and partly with the realization that we don't know what kinds of jobs there will be for the kids who are now sort of entering school at the beginning, with the new, so for instance, new DT curriculum. In Australia, who knows what kinds of jobs will be out there. But for those kinds of people, VR headsets and drones may be part of the whole suite of things that they'll readily make use of in their daily activities. So, there is sort of a responsibility to make sure that our new nascent workforce will have all those skills and familiarity so that they can do the best in that new world that they'll be entering.
I agree. I'm on the school council for a school down here on the Gold Coast, Coomera Rivers State School, and they are an Apple Distinguished school. And so they 5-10 years ago, they had two sets of classes, right? You could either go to the techie classes or the non-techie classes when you arrived at the school. But they decided that that was getting very difficult. And so they got to the point where they said, look, we just accept that we're a technology school, that every kid at our school needs to have an iPad, right? Because they're an Apple distinguished school. So every kid has to have an iPad. And you're right. The commentary on the other end is, well, but what if I can't afford an iPad for my kids? And I understand that. Some of the parents are from lower socioeconomic areas, and they are a public school, and so they don't get to say to the parents, well, just don't send your kids here. They're a public school. Our kids have to come. But they say very similar to what you just said, which is, well, we're enabling the kids for the future. And ultimately, in terms of your child's schooling, $300 or $400 on an iPad, let's work out a way that we can give them that device, because we think there's a responsibility to make sure that the kids actually know how this technology works. We feel that responsibility. And look, to Coomera River's credit, they do some really amazing stuff with technology. I'm on the school council because my kids are students there. And I see what my kids do with the technology, not just in the STEAM classroom, right, in the digi design classroom, but just in learning English or maths or HAS or whatever it might be. And I go, yeah, that's a really effective way to use that piece of technology. And I can't imagine how they would teach without the technology. It's really well integrated into their learning. So I totally understand why they decided at some point that they were just going to go all in with the tech. But yeah, it's still hard. I feel for those parents that say, but I can't afford to buy my kid an iPad. I really do understand where they're coming from. But yeah, it's a balancing act, I suppose.
Well, that's been excellent. I'm going to finish with a question then. So what would be your next big toy to play with?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I guess the toy that I'm playing with, that I've been playing with for the last couple of years, that I think is still kind of got to get out there into the big wide world is smart home stuff, right? In IT parlance, we often use the terminology Internet of Things, and I'm not a big fan of the term Internet of Things or IoT. I think it's a terrible term.
It's very generic.
We need to come up with something better. But it's basically this idea that all the devices around us are smart, right? You use your smart fridge, smart washing machine, smart microwave, and if we take that and we extend that into schools and into education, well, then we have so much opportunity to really help the kids understand what's going on in the world around them, not just based on what they can see on their iPad in front of them, but also based on a whole set of sensors that are scattered around the school. So I've seen schools do this. Some schools do this really effectively with, say, the solar panels on the roof, right? So a lot of schools have gone towards, having solar panels and trying to be a self-sustaining school that generates their own electricity. And then they take that a step further and they take the solar panel data and they give it to the kids, and they say to the kids, here's all the solar panel data about our sunny days and our not so sunny days. And they talk to the kids about, well, why do you think this day was, we didn't get much solar energy? And the kids are able to say, well, it was a rainy day, miss. I remember that was a day that we didn't get to go outside and play. And they can make those connections about the environment and about what's happening in the world around them. I've seen them do it with sensors in the garden. So, a lot of schools are setting up little gardens and things like that. So, you put sensors in the soil or water sensors in the garden, and then you start to talk to the kids about how well the tomatoes are doing, and you can give them the data about how much water the tomatoes actually got. And so I think this broad idea of Internet of Things really gives us an opportunity to extend the technology out and make it ubiquitous, make it out there everywhere in the world. And I'm actually really surprised that it's not something we've done more of already. But as I said, I think we're starting to see it in homes with, you probably heard Google talking before, right? My Google behind me letting me know that it's time for me to stand up and walk around. And we're seeing it with lights, we're seeing it with doors and various other things in homes. And I think it's only a matter of time before we see it go out there into the big wide world as well. So yeah, that's my short long answer is Internet of Things stuff
Splendid. Well, I think you've given me a whole bunch of ideas for Christmas presents for myself now. So,
Well, yeah, once we finish, if you'd like, I'm more than happy to give you recommendations for smart bulbs and smart thermostats and, smart speakers, and whether I prefer Alexa or Google Home. We'll leave that when the recording's not running.
Excellent. All right. Well, Mike, thank you very much for that. That's been fascinating.
Not a problem, Bryn. Great to talk to you.